Throughout the Dead Space media, we have always been introduced to new pieces of information surrounding unitology, whether this was a look at the origins of the religious cult within Dead Space Martyr, the extreme sides to the religion as seen from the games, or the several mentions scattered around the universe. We only really got a surface level insight into how the church had operated within their walls, often leaving us with more questions rather than answers. But now with Dead Space Deep Cover, we have finally been invited to witness what exactly happens when one is brought within their embrace, allowing us to give answers to those questions we could only merely theorize about before. In this series, I will be peeling the layers of this audio series back, giving to you an analysis of the story, detailing the lore each chapter presents. So let's dive back into the dark and twisted world of Dead Space to explore what really happens within the Church of Unitology. The first thing we should probably talk about is where we would fit the story within the timeline of Dead Space. While it hasn't been explicitly stated when this story takes place, there is a hint of the time frame with mentions of the discredited mining industry, which is referring to the CEC being discredited due to the disappearance of their flagship planet cracker vessel, the USG Ishimura. So this implies that the story takes place within the time gap between the first and second games. The story of Deep Cover begins with a unitologist known as Fumihiro Zayn talking to his apartment AI Clementine about his appearance on a show where the host had put some questions to him about his relationship with unitology, which Zayn had said that he didn't speak untruthfully and had answered the questions forthrightly. Unknown to Zayn, however, he wasn't quite as alone as he first thought, as he soon heard something which startles him enough to ask Clementine if something was broken before he saw something creeping out of the shadows, where the shadowy figure itched its way closer and closer to him. But the closer it got to him, the more this figure began to growl at him, before lunging forwards and tearing Zayn apart, ripping him limb from limb, until Zayn's body had been cleaved in two, where it presumably left him to take his final breaths before falling into death's cold embrace. But fortunately, this event hadn't gone unnoticed, as inside the apartment, a camera had picked up everything that happened, allowing Marsh, an editor for Ganymede, First Press Incorporated, to get a copy for his independent investigation, since in his eyes the authorities weren't doing anything about this brutal murder. Which brings us to the main character of this series, Emiline, where she and Marsh have a conversation about the video log, where Marsh makes the observation about the disjointed and disfigured limbs the figure had, which further points to a necromorph being the culprit of this horrific attack, with him stating that the arms are elongated, theorizing that the person could have been using prosthetics to give off that appearance, which gives off the description of a slasher necromorph. This implies that a marker is within the vicinity or is present on Ganymede. Marsh believes that the colony police are covering this murder up and keeping a lid on it, and thinks that unitology must have something to do with this attack, and so he asks Emiline to use her expertise as an undercover journalist to find out the truth within the religious cult, since she had worked with the colony police as an undercover operative before within organized crime, where Marsh even brings up Maddie, Emiline's sister, to further push her into this operation, since she is a unitologist within their ranks, which Emiline reluctantly accepts this opportunity. In this episode, we learn that Maddie had left home and joined unitology, where her communications had stopped and she kept very much to herself. And in the second chapter, we learn that Maddie's relationship with their mother had been a rocky one, with arguments happening between the pair, which Emiline blamed herself for the falling out, stating that if only she had said something to calm the disputes between them, then Maddie may have never have left home and joined the church, which Emiline had said Maddie's disappearance broke their mother's heart and later passed away to unknown causes. In preparation for her mission, Emiline had been fitted with a recording device which had been implanted into her jaw, which had been said to be undetectable without an autopsy. Emiline had also been working for Ganymede First Press Incorporated for the last 6 years. Once Emiline had walked into the church, she was given a warm welcome by a woman at the front desk, who explains to her that the media provides nothing but misinformation about the church, but is thankful that at least some are able to see through the lines of their propaganda. Once Emiline had played into her role, asking about the scriptures of Altman, that she could only find limited information about his teachings from outside of their walls, the woman explains that only the vested levels and above are able to learn about the deep-rooted information surrounding Michael Altman and his teachings, where she also states that it is crucial that misinterpretation of their work not be circulated, which further sounds like a control of information. The woman also tells Emiline that vested levels' living quarters reside in the lower levels of the cathedral, with her explaining some of the facilities and perks that reside within the church's walls, which includes a gym, learning spaces, recreational facilities, meditation and prayer rooms, along with a band, stating that they like to have fun, propping the religion into more of a community. She also states that the church has the means to give free childcare to initiates and silver-graded unitologists, along with educating newborns, all the way to postgraduates. With these things in mind, it isn't hard to see how unitology had managed to become the dominant religious organization in the galaxy, and why so many had become invested in unitology. The woman also explains how one can climb through the ranks inside the church, which can come in two forms. Either the person can show their devotion through hard work and studies, or they can give donations to them, which is described as an income rather than a charity. With donations, depending on the quantity or property, this can speed up the process, allowing people to ascend faster than others who don't have the means to donate. Once Emiline had signed up to the church, the woman had used her biometric data to give her access to their facilities within the cathedral. But once Emiline told the woman that she would need to get her things from her apartment, the woman didn't see any point to this venture, unless it had been for medicine that couldn't be synthesized by a medical practitioner, or had something to do with a disability, which sounds like an excuse to limit the distractions one could have if they were to be allowed to bring personal items into the church with them. Inside the church, the sermon overseer Raider had been giving a speech to the rest of the followers, explaining that they shouldn't raise questions about Michael Altman's death, but to allow his work within them to keep him alive. That through his teachings, the marker has shown to them that all lives will come together as one through convergence when the time is right, or that maybe it has already begun. When Emiline is introduced to Raider, he speaks to her with a warm and welcoming feeling, describing unitology to be a family rather than how the media portrays it. He also speaks with understanding to Emiline's plight with her decision to join unitology, explaining that it must be a difficult and scary decision to make, which this welcoming atmosphere opens herself up to speak more freely, which she later says she spoke truthfully about her experiences to do with her family. In an interesting twist, the overseer we see here sounds similar to the overseer from Dead Space Aftermath. However, in Chapter 2, he isn't described to be as the same age as the overseer from the animated film. Once Emiline had been alone in her living quarters, she remarks on using a false identity as to help her infiltration, as unitologists are already distrusting of the media and reporters, so if they were to find a journalist within their midst, it wouldn't bode well for her mission. Emiline, with her past experiences, however, couldn't help but think that there was something off with the unitologists she met, sensing that something sinister was at play here, which we will find out how sinister unitologists unitology's practices are later down the line, especially in learning more about the trials they need to go through in order to progress through the hierarchy. Outside of the church, the media had been reporting on an attack that happened within the 17th Tenement district, that an assailant had gone on a mass rampage for 30 minutes before being apprehended by authorities, where the person had killed 3 people with a bladed weapon and had injured a lot more, which another person on a separate intercom had been speaking to his followers about the attack, describing this to be out of retaliation for having relatives' data be deleted and their property seized by Unitology, which sounds like the process that comes when a Unitologist passes away, where the speaker states that the church is a weapon that the government or the authorities use to make people disappear. However, what the speaker fails to mention is that the government cannot interfere with Unitology business or practices due to the separation of church and state. The speaker also gives off the impression that this could be some form of social commentary with the state of online reporting, with grifters or opportunists poisoning stories by perpetuating hate towards companies, corporations, studios, and other such things, who also claim stuff like shows to be propaganda if it doesn't follow their own ideological views. However, this may or may not have been the intention of the writer, as throughout Dead Space there has always been a consistent level of distrust between certain parties, but this is just something I picked up on. We also learn in this chapter that a new provision bill had been established to paramilitarize the colony police and private companies who provide security services to medical facilities, where the bill's opposition had come in the form of community leaders and professionals in the medical field, where it sounds like they had said that the increase of lethal force will only lead to more deaths. The last piece to this chapter had been an extremist within Unitology, describing those who aren't with Unitology to be blind to the chaos and the suffering, but that other Unitologists should pity them and try to convince them of Altman's teachings, and if they don't believe, then they won't transcend into unity, which sounds like the Unitology we all know and dread, especially when the speaker states that death will come for the non-believers soon, which gives us a startling impression of what is to come within later chapters of this gripping audio series. Thank you for watching my lore analysis of the first chapter of Dead Space Deep Cover. If you enjoyed, subscribe for more videos like this one, and check out the lore playlist for Dead Space for more twisted details. Let me know your thoughts down below in the comments, and why not become a member to show your support even further, which, like Unitology, has its perks, which includes early access to new content, shoutouts within the videos, and opportunities to have your theories be read out by me in a personalized video or a live stream, and so much more. And I hope to see you return very soon. But for now, be sure to leave this video having a good one.